All right, guys. So welcome to the video, which is going to start, taking all the stuff that we learned so far and putting it all together to, achieve a loud master, and just to really go over the final things that you would need to know when mastering of these stock plugins and how to really end up getting, making sure everything's safe and loud. So what we've got here is Maximus loaded up and a free meter that you can go ahead and download. It's called Voxengo Span. You don't have a meter as a default tool in FL Studio that actually shows you the RMS of something, or if something's, what the max crest factor is, the peak, and so forth, and correlation. So go ahead and get this. It's a free plugin. And what this will help us do is basically see how loud everything has to be. So in terms of RMS, the standard kind of starts in terms of loudness. This depends on your genre. Some genres, sometimes sit around like -6 RMS, which is extremely loud, and others, are like around -9. So I feel like for this type of genre, this type of track, -9 would be really, really good. And we wouldn't have to make it louder than that because it's just going to make things sound undynamic and too squashed. So just feel it out in terms of limiting, don't feel like you need to make something ridiculously loud just to make it loud. If it sounds great at -9 RMS and it sounds too squashed, 3 dB is louder than that, then don't, compromise the quality of your track just because you want to hit a certain number on a scale. If the track's good and it sounds good at -9 RMS, if people want it louder, they're just going to turn up their volume knob. And for things like streaming platforms and so forth, that's too loud anyways. You need to taper it back and export a different version, say at around -13 RMS, something of that nature. Well, that's more measured in LUFs, but that's a good place to start for that. So let's actually go ahead and check out Maximus. And what this really is a multi-maximizer. So we've got all these different bands and the final, master band to kind of take things together. And the way this works is essentially that you can individually, maximize the different bands that you have, and then also put it together. Or you can go ahead and, what I actually like to do most of the times is just take all of this off and use it literally just kind of as like a more complex limiter. So what I'm going to do here is I'm also going to just change the slopes, make everything a bit more broader, put the low cut to like around like 25 hertz, and really start building from here on. So you also have a lot of really cool presets, like I mentioned before, like the Clear Master RMS. We can actually go ahead and take a listen to that. So for this track, I'd probably actually even prefer this preset here, but we don't really want to work off presets. If anything, what we can do is we can kind of assess the preset and what it's doing if we like it. So in this preset, we've got all of the things enabled here, and it's just boosting the volume of certain different parts. So we're getting a lot more low end. We're also getting a lot more high end, and the mids are kind of tapered back a bit, and you've got these different, ways of it being set up. And the ceilings at, we're going to set the ceiling here, and it's set up in a different way. So this can oftentimes work. I'm actually going to, bring this back here. We're actually going to go off this Master Aid 1 preset and see what we can do here, from here on out, really, and just kind of adjust it. But again, you have to be careful with these presets because they can do too much, and I'll show you guys. While I was pressing for the presets, you could probably tell that already. So it's kind of, clearing up things and bringing a bit more punch. But really, it's just, it's doing something, but it's not really doing what we want it to do. So we're just going to go back and, take all of these off, because for this, I already kind of did the minute little edits that I want and kind of built the foundation for the track with the individual stems as well, the way I wanted it to. So I don't see why, in terms of, fixing something that isn't broken, that's why I don't need to really be using these, and I can just kind of live on with what's going on here. So we're going to set the ceiling to around negative 0.5, because that's what sounds best when you're exporting an MP3, and we want to make sure that, nothing's going to be clipping, kind of giving us a bit of room. Let's also make sure that we set the saturation mode up a bit, and you also have a fun stereo separation knob here, which if you go to the left of it, you're going to add a bit more of that stereo information. You're going to be adding a bit more of those sides, and things might even appear a bit wider. I'd recommend to never go beyond like 15% with this on a master, because it might just be too extreme and mess with your whole kind of, the way everything's sounding for your track. So you want to make sure that that is definitely not the case, because if that's too extreme, then everything's just going to be, out of whack. And just like with a mid-side EQ, it's just too much. So conversely, if you go to the right with this, you're going to go ahead and make everything a bit more mono. This is fun with automation as well, to kind of mono things down a bit before a drop hits, to make sure that everything's naturally just kind of a bit wider. But we're just going to go ahead and get this to like 10%. And yeah, again, we're going to set up the low cut a bit higher, get everything kind of the way we want it to sit. And yeah, let's also take down the look ahead, because we don't need that. The look ahead is basically essentially just a way for the limiter to know what's going to happen before it happens. So it makes, an already fast attack even faster. And we're going to go ahead and bring this attack up just a touch. You can even mess around with these curves if you want to. That could give you different sound characteristics. And yeah, basically we're just going to start off of this. I'd also recommend for you to check out this field in the maximizer. Not go too crazy with it, but sometimes you can get different sound characteristics by just like, say, moving something to the left or right or something, just one up or one down. It can get you different sound characteristics as well for what's actually happening with this. So let's go ahead and see how loud we can get this, and for it to still sound good, really. So you can see we're nicely hitting around that -9 RMS. Also, our correlation meter is showing us that everything's in phase, and that nothing's really, phasing, too much, and that the left and right is also balanced, and we're hitting, that volume that we want. The reason why it doesn't show up, as like, oh, that loud, is because I have a fruity balance afterwards to make sure that it's not too loud on your guys' end. But let's actually go ahead, since this is like, basically taking it up around 6 dB. Let's go ahead and do a reference, just in terms of, so you can see how a limiter actually affects the sound. And Maxima specifically, you can do so much in terms of how to really dial in a certain sound that you want. So oftentimes with Maximus, I find less is more. Let's see how that is affecting the overall sound of this. So you can really tell how Maximus also really helps out bringing out the little subtle effects that we applied beforehand, to build our foundation. And I'll take this time to talk about signal flow as well, because in a scenario like mastering, it's even more precedent that you pay attention to where things are sitting. So let's say take something like, EQ before compression, which is something that people love to talk about and debate about, even though I think that it's not really that, important to, think about, okay, what becomes before what in that sense, just go with what, is practical and sounds best in that scenario. And the reason for, why people debate on these kinds of things is because, um, and why signal flow is important in your chains, especially mastering chains, where everything's sitting, is because everything you do at a certain stage affects what comes after it. So meaning that, say, for example, we take that example of EQ before compression. If you EQ a signal before you compress it, EQing, say, some frequencies out or removing some form of, or giving, us a bit more headroom is going to affect what happens after. So say it's the same principle if we low cut out stuff, around 30 hertz in a master, that's going to help us push the limiter a bit more because it gives us a bit more headroom because we're getting rid of frequencies that we don't need. And that same principle is just throughout the whole signal flow of a mastering chain. What happens, say before this multiband compressor would affect how it reacts. Say if I do something extreme input like this fruity balance, which is taking it down 6 dB in front of the multiband compressor, that's going to completely affect how the compressor reacts to the sound. In the same way that the way this is working in the mid-side EQ that we have set up here, that's affecting how the compressor is reacting to the bass. It might not be a huge difference, but it is a difference nonetheless. And sometimes also at the end, it's fun to kind of, see, okay, what happens if I put this EQ before that? Or, you'll probably have a bit more tools involved as well. And you can mess around with these order of things to see if that enhances something differently, or if that gives you a bit more stereo width, or if that, if the reaction of a compressor differs, and if that's better or worse. Playing around with that or just being aware of how that works is really, really important. So as you can see, you definitely are able to do some form of mastering in FL Studio with just the FL Studio stock plugins, as long as obviously the track is well produced and you also know what you're doing. And I hope that, through seeing me, applying these stock plugins here and there, and just the subtlety of everything as well in something like stem mastering, and using these plugins, more is often, less is oftentimes more, and really knowing and assessing where your track does need something changed is going to make the largest difference. Flicking through presets is just kind of a cop out, and will oftentimes not get you the result that you want. So, go down and study the tools that you have available to you. And I cannot say this enough, obviously getting some free plugins, especially something like a meter, is going to really 10x your performance in terms of mastering.